Hello and welcome, I'm Sim UK, and it is my goal to provide to you the most honest, fact-based critical reviews on YouTube. If you find this review helpful, then please hit that like button, subscribe, and help to support the channel by donating via the links below. Thank you so much, and enjoy the review. The Tour de France is testament to human endurance. It proves what we as a species are really capable of. The grueling mountain climbs, the super fast twisty downhill sections, and the explosive sprint speeds are beyond belief. The constant evolution of technology, the bravery and the determination to push oneself beyond limits are just a few of the things which make the Tour de France so special. And to capture all of the complexity, the danger and the excitement in a simulator is no easy task. Thankfully, the Tour de France 2020, which is now available on Steam and therefore PC, does a bloody good job of it. At least it does on most fronts, but there are a few areas where it could improve.
Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this Grand Depart in the Nice hinterland. We have an unusual route for this first stage because in a rare event for the Tour de France, the riders will have to complete 3 big circuits. However, that probably won't upset the scenario of the stage, which should end in a bunch sprint on the Promenade des Anglais.
Tour de France 2020 has a few game modes. There's the new and improved time trial mode, which focuses on speed and bike handling rather than the longer, more tactical multi-staged events. This is perfect for newcomers who will likely find it more immediately rewarding, especially when combined with the excellent new first-person view. There is a single-player and team career option as well, which requires you to manage your team and their events, your personal finances to a degree, and of course your fitness. I've preferred the single-player mode over the team career mode because I find it stressful enough to manage just one rider. But even when you are playing in the single-player career, you are still able to take control of any of the other riders in your team. This is a feature that I detest with great relish. This, it seems, is an unfortunate necessity though, as the AI is drastically lacking in my humble opinion when it comes to your teammates. Although at times they have provided me with suitable barriers in order to assist my ascension to winning those coveted jerseys, on the most part, they just don't seem to be on the same page as me.
Amongst the leading riders of this year, here is the polka dot jersey of this Tour de France, Guillaume Martin.
AI opponents, on the other hand, do seem to be pretty good, making attacks which come to absolutely nothing, don't occur that often, and I have even seen a rider single-handedly take all but one gate and almost the finish line.
Go, 1 kilometer. Give it all you've got.
The controls are locked to default, but they are functional. You accelerate with the right trigger and brake with the left. You attack by tapping the A button repeatedly. Variations in speed here do make a difference. A smart and intuitive radial in the bottom right hand corner displays the effort and energy levels. That's your overall stamina, which is in blue, and short sprint energy, which is in red. Riding and sprinting both use up energy, and whilst depleted energy can be recovered over time, the ever-present danger is blowing up. This happens when you run out of both stamina and sprint energy. The 2 feed vials in the centre can be used to replenish low energy reserves more quickly and are replaced once during a stage, so it becomes a very technical balance between speed over energy. Wind is another ever-present factor. Shielding from it reduces the rate at which your energy reserves will deplete, and this is where the skill of teamwork will allow you to achieve more than you ever could do alone. That being said, the communication system with your team is not that intuitive, and often getting your team to do what you actually want them to do is a bit tricky. And in fact, it's damn near impossible until you unlock the leader ability. Now, I've got to say that I've really enjoyed playing Tour de France 2020. It certainly is a game that's capable of delivering hour upon hour of competitive fun for beginners and experts alike. If you're a fan of the Tour de France already, then this is probably in your collection right now. But for newcomers, there are a few hurdles which can stand between knowing whether or not this game is right for you or not. And hopefully that's what I'm going to address in this review today. Now, I consider myself to be above the ranks of a complete noob, but also well below that of an expert. And when it comes to the Tour de France, or any other road racing event for that matter, it's kind of important that you understand why. Firstly, you need to understand the terminology. Terms like baroudeur, echelon, and even peloton can be confusing at first. Once you have mastered these terms, and many others, then you need to start thinking about race strategy. It's no longer enough to be first over the line. There are multiple stages and different disciplines to consider. Race day tactics with points and time rewards to earn, not to mention the numerous number of jerseys that are on offer. It's not all just about the yellow one. Then there's race etiquette, how and when to behave, and as none of this is really achievable alone, you do have to work with your team, which means that you have responsibilities, roles, and limitations that you need to consider as well. The Tour de France is not a simple race from A to B anymore. There are many more factors and calculations that need to be ironed out before you can even put yourself into a position where you can win. And for many, that is the biggest hurdle to games like this. People just don't get it. They don't understand enough, and quite often, they don't really know where to start. Tour de France 2020 does do a decent job of teaching the game's core mechanics. It shows you how to use the controls, how to understand the UI, and how to communicate with your team. There's even a coach or a guide within the game who verbally tries to explain how certain aspects work, warns you of important events, and even assists you when making decisions that you might not really be ready to make. But I still feel that a lot more could be done to explain race day tactics. I would love for one of the tutorials to basically take me through an entire stage and teach me when and where the tactics should be employed and why. The UI, however, is crisp, informative, and intuitive, so getting into the game is pretty straightforward. Tour de France 2020 is officially licensed, which means all of the riders, their teams and kits are represented to the highest level of authenticity. Graphically, I think the game is just fine. We're not talking next-gen graphics here, but they are perfectly adequate, and that means it will run smoothly on just about any device. And some of the 21 official stages of the Tour de France are pretty darned realistic and nice to look at too, especially when you're freewheeling it down the side of a mountain at 75 kilometers per hour. Although that might not be the best time to do your sightseeing. The new first-person camera is brilliant. I absolutely love it. Without it, I wouldn't have liked this game anywhere near as much as I actually do. It transforms what would otherwise be a very simplified version of Pro Cycling Manager, and as good as it is, I do think that more needs to be done in order to distinguish them from one another, because right now, this feels a little bit too much like being an add-on for Pro Cycling Manager, and that's not a good thing. So, it certainly does look the part, and whilst there is quite a big learning curve, it's a heck of a lot of fun to play as you're learning. But there are some areas that I think need to be addressed by next year. The audio. It's just lacking. There are these generic audio files that play over and over in a semi-pleasing way, which does make Tour de France 2020 perfectly playable, but certainly not as immersive as it could be. The jeers, cheers and encouragement from the crowd are pretty great, but overall the lack of audio, especially for the bike itself, becomes a little distracting at times. The game's physics are also incredibly disappointing. From bike controls to momentum and collisions, Tour de France 2020 fails to behave realistically. First of all, there are no bike gears to manage, which dramatically simplifies the riding experience. To be honest, bike management is completely omitted from this game. There's no damage to parts or wear and tear to consider, and whilst freewheeling downhill is a heck of a lot of fun, if you take your foot off the accelerator button in anything less than a 5% downhill slope, it's just like you've hit the brakes. This is especially annoying when you've controlled your pace and want to attack briefly. Personally, I think that after your attack, it should just auto-return to your preset pace, your cadence. Instead, it releases it completely, returning you momentarily to 0, which, as I just mentioned, is exactly like hitting the brakes, and that can ruin your attack. Now, key binding cannot be altered, and whilst the default setup is okay, I really want to be able to change my keybinds, or more specifically, I want to be able to tweak and adjust sensitivity. As mentioned, the front brake is lethal. Now, whilst it is possible for you to crash your bike and even fall, my word, you do have to work incredibly hard to achieve that. Sadly, collisions are simply not a part of Tour de France 2020, be it a tree or another rider, and I think that's a real shame. It's a massive shame, especially now that we have the new first-person perspective, which I absolutely love. It would be so much more immersive and fun and engaging to have to carefully weave your way through the peloton, instead of just mindlessly pushing your way through it. I already tried to race this way, even though there's no need to do that, because, in my eyes at least, weaving through the pack is an art form all of its own, and the game really fails to embrace it. Irrespective of these limitations and frustrations that I have with Tour de France 2020, it is actually a wonderful depiction of the Tour de France. Right now, it does feel too similar to Pro Cycling Manager, and I think it really needs to embrace the simulation side of things far more in order to help differentiate itself. But there is nothing here that will stop you from enjoying the game and enjoying a challenge. Now, there's a caveat to that. I suspect that some of the hardcore players have already figured out the game's internal workings, and they're just dominating without even needing to try anymore, because that is exactly what happens in Pro Cycling Manager. These elite players have just figured out the game's core mechanics, and they just utilize them to their advantage, which is a real shame. Hopefully they're having a bit more of a struggle with this game, but I suspect that it's much the same. On the other hand, though, players like myself are really going to enjoy the challenge. I'm learning from my mistakes and enjoying the entire experience a huge amount. If I could request just 3 improvements for Tour de France 2021, it would be the inclusion of gears and perhaps more immersive bike management, broken components, things like that. I would like to see the improvement of collisions and the bike physics, and actually, I'd really like to see an online co-op option for the career. But, as it is, it's actually a heck of a lot of fun, and the Steam reviews do reflect this. However, small improvements on a yearly basis simply do not fly in the simulation world. Certainly not at this price, and it matters not how much you love the sport. But Tour de France 2020 definitely is good. Thanks for watching. I'm Sim UK. Please hit that like button and subscribe if you'd like to see more. Take care. Till next time. Goodbye.
Last kilometre. It will be decided in the sprint.
Last kilometre. You've got to sprint. You almost look out of strength. Look after yourself if you want to avoid a blow-up.